Turns out, the HOA had no legal claim at all. They'd built their empire on paper lies. They called the cops on me, on my own ranch. All because I wouldn't bow to an HOA that thought it ruled this valley. They built fake rules, seized homes, and figured I was just another quiet rancher. Big mistake, because I'm the one who oversees every HOA in the state. And this time justice came printed on the papers they forged. The gravel road remembered me. It hissed under my tires, a dry whisper that rose into dusk and drifted across the pasture. I eased to a stop at the cedar and pipe gate my grandfather welded decades ago. The chain still wore the red paint we brushed on one summer when the grasshoppers were biblical. The farmhouse crouched beyond the fence, roofline set like a jaw. Dust, sun-warmed wood, and that faint mineral bite of Montana air met me as I cut the engine. Then blue washed across the fence posts. A cruiser's bar lit behind me. Another nosed in from the county road, tires crackling. Headlights turned dust to glitter. One car idled by the mailbox. The other slid to the far side of the gate. I stepped out slow, palms visible, hat brim tipped so they could see my eyes. "Evening," the older deputy said. "Rodriguez," the plate read. The younger one's flashlight painted my boots, the gate chain, the bed of my truck with its tarped tool chest and rolled maps. Down the lane, a golf cart whined. On it, a woman rode like she owned the sky. "Officers," she called before the cart stopped. "That's the man I told you about. He's trespassing on community land." She stepped off in a click of heels that didn't know gravel. Blonde, cut sharp, lipstick sharp, smile sharpest. Bethany Whitfield, HOA president of something that should never have reached this far into pasture. "This isn't community land," I said. "It's private property. My family's." Her smile didn't move, but it hardened. "I've lived here 15 years, Mr. Remy," I said. "Jake." "Mr. Remy," she repeated. "And I've never seen you." The Willow Ridge Estates HOA maintains this common access with strict rules about after-dark entry. "Officers, please proceed." Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we'll sort out ownership. Sir, ID?" I handed him my license and, because I don't come to a gate without paper, a slim oilskin folder. The chain links rattled once in the wind. I laid the documents on the tailgate. Certified deed, meets and bounds my granddad could recite like a psalm, and the plat map with its creek line and a square labeled Domestic Diversion, 1978. The younger deputy angled his flashlight over the paper. Dust danced in the beam. Bethany's tone went thin. "You can print anything. Our survey shows a boundary adjustment. He's inside the HOA easement." "It's a fence line and a cattle guard," I said. "That easement lets neighbors reach their wells across my North 40. The HOA doesn't own a thimble of this soil." "We'll see," she said. Rodriguez took his time, traced the description with a finger, then looked up. "Looks in order." Bethany laughed, bright and brittle. "Looks can be arranged, deputy. This is a safety issue. We've had concerns about unsanctioned activity at this property." "Sanctioned by whom?" I asked. "You?" Her eyes flashed. Somewhere down by the draw, a nighthawk stitched the sky. "Sir," Rodriguez said levelly, "we received a complaint. If you can show proof of ownership—" "I can do better," I said, and slid a different wallet from my jacket. The leather still carried the nick it got the day I hit a barbed wire snag outside Miles City. I opened it to the badge and the card that opens doors people like Bethany pretend to own. State of Montana. Department of Community Affairs. Division of Common Interest Community Oversight. Compliance Director. The air around the gate shifted. The younger deputy's flashlight dipped. Rodriguez exhaled through his nose. "You expect me to believe you oversee HOAs?" Bethany said. "I don't expect," I said. "I audit boards, budgets, bylaws, when they use their little rulebooks to bully people who know more about fence lines than they do. I remind the state what a deed means. A train horn drifted up valley. Breeze carried the cool breath of the dam pond, where my grandfather taught me to skip rocks flat as plates. Rodriguez handed back my license with the respect men who work outside offer one another. Mr. Remy, welcome home. Bethany's jaw worked once. This isn't over. Flash whatever card you like. You have 72 hours to disappear. That a threat? I asked. It's a courtesy, she said, stepping onto her golf cart. For you, and for the community. The cart whined away, tail light blinking like an insult. The cruisers idled a minute longer for protocol. When the lights clicked off and the dust settled back to its place on the road, the night pressed in the way it does when the planes give up their heat. Willow leaves combed the creek like quiet fingers. Rodriguez lingered. Mind if I say something off the record? Go ahead. Folks around here like her organization. They also like your granddad's dam when August gets long. If this turns into a tug of war, keep it by the book. It'll matter. That's the only way I work, I said. He nodded. Good luck. I slid the chain from the post and swung the gate. The hinge protested, a dry groan. Then the weight found its arc, and the gate moved the way it was meant to move. The truck rolled across the threshold. In the rear view, the red soil shone where the tires had polished it, 2 ribbons catching starlight. The house smelled the same. Dry pine boards, coffee gone to ghost in a tin, leather that had stored a lifetime of weather. I set the folder on the kitchen table where the knot in the wood looks like a whirl of wind. My grandfather's handwriting was still on the nail keg by the back door. Wash mud off boots. He'd meant it as a rule. It read like a blessing. I pumped water, cold, metallic, good, and carried a mug to the porch. The pond held a strip of pale sky like a coin you only show to friends. I could almost hear my grandfather's boots on these boards, the slow cadence of a man who didn't talk unless it was needed. 72 hours. I let the number sit with the crickets and the owl and the soft tick of the cooling truck. I'd call Sarah and tell her I'd made it. I'd check the padlocks on the pump house. I'd sleep, then wake into the long light that knows the difference between bluster and ownership. And in the morning, I'd read the bylaws Bethany loved so much, line by line, out loud if I had to, just to hear how wrong a rule can sound when you hold it up to a deed. The dawn light came thin and gold through the cottonwoods, stirring dust motes inside the kitchen like slow snow. I brewed coffee on the old gas stove, the kind that sighs before it lights, and carried the mug to the porch. The silence had a weight to it, the kind that holds both peace and warning. Then I saw the color. Orange slips clung to my front gate like autumn leaves that forgot to fall. Dozens of them. They fluttered against the posts, the fence rails, even my porch column, each one stamped with the Willow Ridge HOA seal. Violation notice, the bold print declared. I walked down barefoot, the planks warm underfoot, and began to pull them free one by one. Grass exceeds HOA limit by 1 inch, read the first. Mailbox color inconsistent with community palette, said the second. Another fined me for a visible beverage container on porch. I looked at the cup in my hand and let out a low, humorless laugh. By the time I'd gathered them all, the stack was thick as a small-town phone book, 47 in total. Every page carried Bethany's sweeping signature, ink so heavy it dug into the paper. She must have been up half the night printing them. Ernest Walker's voice startled me from behind the fence. Don't take it personal, son. She's been doing this for years. He leaned on the top rail, his hat pulled low, face creased like a weather map. Your granddad was the last one who stood up to her. After he passed, folks just stopped fighting. I handed him a few of the notices. She typed all these since last night? Typed, signed, probably smiled the whole time, Ernest said. There's 3 ways she runs people off: fines, fear, and fatigue. Most don't make it past the second. She doesn't know who she's dealing with, I said, but my stomach nodded. Power like hers didn't need a gun, just persistence and paperwork. Ernest spat into the dust. You watch yourself, Jake. She's got friends up at the courthouse. Harrison's the name. Judge. Likes his whiskey and his favors. He walked off before I could ask more. Back inside, I laid the notices across the kitchen table, sorting them by timestamp. Some were logged at 1:12 a.m., others near 3. She'd been prowling the property herself or sent someone. Either way, it was stalking wrapped in stationery. I took photos of every page, angles, signatures, and the smudge of her fingerprint where she'd pressed too hard. Then I scanned the whole stack and saved it under a folder labeled Evidence. Old habits die loyal. A soft rap sounded at the door. A woman stood on the steps, nervous eyes, wind-blown hair, holding a casserole dish like a shield. Mr. Remy? She asked. I'm Linda from across the pasture. I saw the patrol cars last night. Figured you might need breakfast, or a warning. She stepped in when I waved her through. Bethany doesn't lose gracefully, Linda said. She's been waiting to get her hands on this ranch since the resort deal fell apart 20 years ago. My husband tried to fight her fines once, ended up selling just to stop the letters. I set the dish on the counter. I don't scare easy, Linda. I know, she said softly. That's what worries me. Her eyes darted to the window where the porch faced the road. A golf cart idled there, visor gleaming. Bethany, in her spotless white jacket, watching. She raised her phone, pretending to check messages, but the lens pointed straight at us. I smiled wide and waved. The motion must have unsettled her. She sped off, gravel pinging against the ditch. Linda exhaled. You just made her list. I was already at the top. When she left, I sat again at the table, opened my laptop, and began typing an email to the State Archive office. Request, certified copy of Willow Ridge HOA Charter, Amendments 2005-2023. The law is simple when you strip the noise. Every bully hides behind paperwork, and paperwork cuts both ways. By mid-afternoon, the wind rose. The notices still on the fence flapped like a flock trying to take off. I poured myself another coffee and watched the sky bruise with distant thunderheads. That's when I noticed the last envelope, wedged beneath the doormat. Unlike the others, this one wasn't printed. Thick paper, cursive ink. My name written slow and deliberate. Mr. Remy. Inside was a single sheet. You have 70 hours left to reconsider your position. The HOA would hate to make this personal. B. I read it twice. The handwriting slanted uphill, confident, almost joyous. She wanted a war. Outside, the first drop of rain hit the tin roof. I pinned the letter to the corkboard beside the old map of the property, a storm building in both. 70 hours, I muttered. Let's see who runs out first. The rain came in soft, steady sheets, washing the dust from the porch and turning the red soil to clay. I spent the evening at the kitchen table, laptop open, copying every violation notice into a spreadsheet. Time, date, description, signature. Bethany's name glared back at me in looping blue ink like it enjoyed the attention. By 9, the rain eased, leaving that hollow quiet you only get after a storm. The drip of eaves, the tick of cooling tin, and far off, the low hum of frogs staking territory in the ditches. I was about to turn in when I caught a glint outside. It came from the edge of the yard, near the rose garden my grandmother planted decades ago. I switched off the light and stood by the window. A figure moved slowly through the wet grass, the beam of a headlamp sweeping low and careful. Whoever it was carried something bulky, hissing with a faint pump rhythm. I grabbed the camera remote from the counter and opened the monitoring app. The feed from the motion sensor blinked to life, grainy but clear enough. The shape bent over the roses, misting something across the bushes. The pump hiss grew louder, followed by the faint slosh of liquid hitting leaves. Then, through the crackle of rain and distance, I heard her voice, tinny but clear, the kind of tone you can't mistake once you've been on the wrong end of it. "Only the old bushes, Robert," Bethany said. "Leave the new ones, and wear the shoes I left you. They're 2 sizes bigger." My jaw locked. Robert, her husband. I let the camera roll, making sure the timestamp was visible, then saved the clip to 2 different drives. By morning, the air smelled like burnt sugar and rot. The rose leaves had blackened overnight, edges curling in on themselves like fists. The soil was slick and dark, reeking of chemicals. I crouched, touched a stem. It crumbled between my fingers. When Sheriff McKay arrived, his cruiser crunching down the gravel, I handed him a flash drive. "You'll want to see this." He studied the footage inside the cab, engine idling. His face didn't change much, but his sigh did. "Mr. Remy, this is interesting. But without catching them in the act, a DA'll say it's circumstantial. You sure it's her voice?" "I'd stake a deed on it," I said. "I don't doubt you. Just the kind of thing that gets muddy in court." He handed back the drive, expression cautious. "I'll file a report. You should also start locking your gates." He left with the same careful neutrality lawmen wear when they know the town politics are rotten. By noon, I'd replaced every padlock on the property and installed 2 new cameras, one watching the drive, one watching the garden. The whole time I could feel Bethany's eyes somewhere beyond the fence, counting every move. At dusk, lightning flickered again over the hills, lighting up the silhouette of the dam at the far end of the property. I walked there, boots sinking into damp soil, the air electric, with ozone. The dam was small but solid, Army Corps workmanship from another era. It held back a pond big enough for trout and summer evenings. My grandfather used to say that water remembers. It keeps score quietly. Back at the house, I poured a mug of coffee and listened to the rain start again. The camera feed pinged with movement, a white golf cart crawling along the outer fence line. 2 figures inside, one of them unmistakably Bethany's sharp profile under the visor light. She stopped by my mailbox, clipboard in hand, pretending to jot notes. Her partner, Robert, kept glancing toward the house. I leaned closer to the monitor and snapped a still frame. My phone buzzed right then. Unknown number. Text message. "Saw you watching, Jake. Sleep tight. HOA patrol never rests." I typed a reply but stopped halfway. She wanted reaction. She wanted noise. Instead, I took a deep breath, opened the HOA bylaws I'd downloaded the night before, and began highlighting everything she'd violated herself. Unauthorized patrols, harassment of homeowners, misuse of HOA seal. I built my own case in silence while the rain drummed the rhythm of patience on the roof. By midnight, the storm had moved east, and the sky cracked open to stars. The air smelled clean again. I stepped onto the porch with my mug and looked toward the rose garden, now just dark humps in the starlight. The frogs had gone quiet, as if even they sensed the tension crawling through the fence lines. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, then another. The echo rolled over the hills and faded. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the sound of Bethany setting the next trap. Either way, I smiled to myself. She wasn't the only one who knew how to set one. Characters, 6083. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, then another. The echo rolled over the hills. The next morning, the world smelled of wet sage and iron. The clouds had wrung themselves out overnight, leaving the sky rinsed clean. I loaded the old pickup with a thermos, the evidence folder, and my grandfather's rolled property map. The road into town shimmered with puddles that reflected the fence lines like barbed wire halos. The Gallatin County Records Office sat 2 streets off Main, a limestone building that still carried the echo of typewriters. The clerk at the counter looked about 19 and already bored. "Morning," I said, sliding my request form across. "Looking for deed records on parcel 72-14, Willow Ridge Estates." He squinted. "That's HOA territory." "Just pull the file," I said pleasantly. "All amendments, survey adjustments, and boundary easements since 1980. The kid wandered off. The overhead fluorescents hummed like distant bees. I tapped my fingers on the counter, listening to the hollow rhythm, until he came back with a cardboard archive box thick with dust. "Here," he said, sneezing. "Half of this is digital now, but some old plats never got scanned." I carried the box to a table by the window, cracked it open, and breathed in the paper's age, ink, mold, and time. Inside were maps, title transfers, and surveyor's notes written in pencil hard enough to dent the page. One folder was labeled Whitfield Adjustment 2009. My pulse jumped. Inside were 3 topo maps and a letterhead from a surveying firm long out of business. On the map, a faint line showed an added HOA access corridor, slicing through what was clearly my grandfather's property. The coordinates had been altered by less than 50 feet, just enough to confuse future filings. But someone had made a mistake. They forgot the original Army Corps permit stamped on the back of the oldest map, Domestic Diversion Structure Number 11, Remy Ranch Dam. The federal code under the seal was unmistakable. It meant the dam and its adjoining access road fell under federal jurisdiction, not state, and certainly not HOA. I photographed everything, each corner of each page, careful to capture the raised ink of the seal. Then I found the cherry on top, a memo stapled to the folder, written by a long-retired county engineer. Note: request by HOA board to amend boundaries denied pending review of existing water permit. Do not alter until federal notification received. It had never been received, apparently. As I left, the clerk called after me. "Need anything else?" "Maybe later," I said. "You wouldn't happen to have records on a developer named Preston Hale, would you?" The kid frowned, flipping through his keyboard. There's a P. Hale listed on half a dozen property transfers since 2016, all shell companies." Figures. I stepped into the sunlight, my boots hitting the wet pavement just as an engine idled across the street. A black SUV, tinted windows, no plates on the front. The kind of vehicle that doesn't stay long enough to get ticketed. The driver wore aviators, his face hidden, but I caught a glint of a cufflink when he tapped the wheel. I stared right back. The SUV rolled forward, slow, deliberate, before turning down the next block and disappearing into traffic. Back at the ranch, I spread the new photos beside the original deed. The lines matched perfectly. Bethany's common access corridor was nothing more than wishful thinking built on bad paperwork. I sent digital copies to my work email under the subject line: potential violation, Willow Ridge HOA boundary fraud. Then I printed one clean set for the sheriff and another for myself. Late afternoon brought a heavy wind that rattled the tin roof. I was sealing the envelope when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Remy?" The voice was gravel wrapped in courtesy. "Name's Preston Hale. I believe you've been reviewing some old maps." "I have. You the one who drew them wrong?" He chuckled, slow and confident. "Mistakes happen. I'd rather we clear this up quietly. There's no need for reports, no need for conflict. I could make it worth your while." "Not interested," I said. "Everyone's interested in something. Money, peace, reputation. Mine's principle," I said, You can't buy that." There was a pause long enough to hear wind static through the line. "Then you might find peace hard to come by, Mr. Remy. Some things around here don't stay buried." He hung up. Outside, the wind carried a dry whistle through the fence posts. I drove the papers to the sheriff's office anyway, sliding them through the after-hours drop box. No note, no signature, just facts waiting to be found. That night, I sat by the window watching the yard lights glow weak against the black fields. The pond shimmered under the moon like a piece of mercury. Somewhere out past the dam, a coyote yipped, then another answered. The land had its own conversations, older than any bylaw. On the table beside me, the map with the federal stamp fluttered once in the breeze from the cracked window. I weighed it down with the deed. If Bethany and her developer thought they could rewrite boundaries, they'd forgotten one thing. Paper remembers everything. The next morning broke still and pale. Mist hugged the fields, thick enough to swallow the fence lines. From the porch, I could see only the top of the old windmill, turning slow, cutting through the fog like an old clock hand. The air smelled of wet hay and iron, the kind of morning that felt like waiting. I made coffee and pulled out my phone. It was time to call Sarah Coleman. She'd been my colleague back when I worked in Helena, a lawyer who understood land and water better than anyone I'd met. When she answered, her voice was warm but edged with curiosity. "Jake Remy, I was wondering when you'd finally get tired of retirement." "Didn't plan on coming out of it," I said. "But I've got an HOA trying to annex my family's land, and they're doing it with altered surveys and a forged boundary adjustment." Sarah's tone sharpened. "You have documentation?" "Enough to wallpaper City Hall," I said, "and a developer named Preston Hale who's already made his first threat." "Send everything to my office," she said without hesitation. "I'll dig into the corporate side, see what his shell companies own. But be careful. Folks like Hale don't play fair when they stand to lose millions." "I don't play their game," I said. "I write the rule book." After we hung up, I scanned the maps again, marking each property Hale had quietly acquired. A pattern formed like bruises spreading on a map, a chain of parcels looping around the lake, all touching the access road that ran through my ranch. He wasn't building homes. He was cornering the water rights. A knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Dorothy Kim stood there, holding a tray covered with a checkered cloth. She'd lived down the road since my grandfather's time, small and wiry, eyes sharp as nails. "Thought you might want lunch," she said. "And maybe company." Inside, she unpacked sandwiches and a mason jar of sweet tea. "You've stirred up quite the nest," she said, settling at the table. "Bethany's been making her rounds, telling folks you plan to sell to a mining outfit." "That's a new one," I said. "Guess slander's free." Dorothy smiled without humor. "When your grandfather fought to stop that resort 20 years ago, she blamed him for ruining her family. Her father lost a lot of money. Folks said she never forgave it." "She's had 2 decades to cool off," I said. "She doesn't cool, she hardens." Dorothy sipped her tea. "But you've got allies. Ernest Walker dropped by this morning, said he found something you should see." She pulled a manila envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies of HOA ledgers, columns of names, fines, and dates. Ernest had scribbled notes in the margins. Same pattern each year. Target one homeowner. Bleed them with fees. Foreclose. Sell to Hale. I stared at the columns, the handwriting neat but angry. "How'd he get these?" "HOA printer jams sometimes," she said. "Ernest works maintenance for the community hall. He's good with paper jams." I laughed, but my chest tightened with something like gratitude. The old guard hadn't given up after all. That evening, I drove to Ernest's barn. The man was oiling a tractor, the same way I remembered my grandfather doing, steady and unhurried. "You got my notes," he said. Figured you'd want to see where the money ends up. He pointed to a clipboard full of bank statements. All HOA reserves are supposed to go into a community account. Bethany's been moving them into something called Willow Ridge Improvement Fund. Guess who signs as co-trustee? Preston Hale, I said. Bingo. We stood there for a moment, the silence filled with the creak of the barn rafters and the low hum of the night insects outside. Ernest wiped his hands on a rag. You going to bring them down? With facts, I said. And the law. He nodded. Good. Because the rest of us are too tired to fight anymore. You still got that fire your granddad had. Just remember, fires burn both ways. Back home, the night was warm and restless. I sat at my desk, cross-referencing Ernest's ledgers with county tax records. One property after another linked back to Hale. Every false fine, every foreclosure. Another brick in the empire. Sarah called again near midnight. I traced the improvement fund, she said. It's laundering money through 3 dummy corporations in Texas. Hale and Bethany are partners on all of them. You've got enough to trigger a federal audit. I'll need more than that, I said. I want them in court. You'll get it, she said. But Jake, watch your back. When people like this feel cornered, they don't stay civil. After the call, I stepped outside. The stars were out, bright and hard, scattered like nails across black wood. Down by the dam, the water shimmered faintly in the moonlight. I thought about my grandfather, how he built that dam with his own hands and fought to keep it public. Bethany could play at power. Hale could hide behind LLCs. But out here, the land still answered to the people who understood it, and I intended to remind them of that. Somewhere behind the tree line, a dog barked once, sharp and warning. Then headlights flared on the far road and faded just as quickly. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. I finished my tea and locked every door in the house. Tomorrow, I'd send the files to Sarah and start preparing for the next step, taking this fight into the open. The quiet had lasted long enough. It was time for noise. The next morning came bright and dry, the kind of Montana sunlight that bleaches even the shadows. When I opened my laptop, a new email waited at the top of the inbox. The subject line was brief. Emergency HOA meeting, 6 p.m., Community Hall. Beneath it, a note from Bethany herself. Attendance required for all property owners within Willow Ridge boundaries. Agenda: property safety violations, environmental hazards, and unresolved disputes. I read it twice, then smiled. The cornered always summon a crowd. I packed the evidence, USB drives, printed ledgers, the county maps, and a fresh copy of the federal permit with the embossed seal, and slid them into a leather folio. The kind my grandfather used when arguing with bureaucrats who'd never seen dirt under their nails. By evening, the sun hung low over the pasture, laying gold light across the hills. I pulled into the community hall's gravel lot, joining a line of SUVs and sedans that gleamed like teeth. People milled near the entrance, dressed for church but bracing for war. Conversations dropped as I stepped from the truck. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat. Rows of folding chairs faced a projector screen. At the front stood Bethany, perfect as ever, hair-pinned, pearls in place, smile too wide to trust. On either side of her sat the HOA board, flanked by Preston Hale in a tailored suit that didn't belong anywhere near a ranch. "Thank you for coming," Bethany began, voice carrying that practiced calm. "We're here tonight to discuss an issue affecting the safety and property values of our beloved community." She clicked a remote. The projector lit the wall with a series of photos, grainy shots of my ranch. One showed the dam under a thunderstorm, another the rose garden blackened after her own handiwork. She'd labeled them potential contamination site and unlicensed structure. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few whispered my name. Bethany's tone grew solemn. "Unfortunately, One property has repeatedly failed to comply with environmental and architectural standards. Our experts believe the old dam poses a risk of water contamination. This is not about blame. It's about protecting families. She turned, smiling directly at me. Mr. Remy, since you're present, you're welcome to respond briefly before we proceed to board action. I rose slowly, letting the chair legs scrape the floor. Every eye in the hall followed me. Thank you, Madam President, I said, voice steady. Before I address your so-called experts, I'd like to clarify something for the record. I held up the folio. This document here is the original Army Corps permit for the Remy Dam. Federal jurisdiction, renewed twice since 1978, meaning your HOA's authority ends at the fence line, not the water line. A murmur spread through the audience. Bethany's smile twitched. Mr. Remy, this is hardly the place. It's exactly the place, I said, opening my laptop on the front table. Let's have a listen instead of a lecture. I tapped the spacebar. The speakers crackled, then played the night recording. Robert's heavy footsteps, the hiss of the sprayer, and Bethany's unmistakable voice. Only the old bushes. Leave the new ones, and wear the shoes I left you. The sound filled the hall. When it ended, silence fell so thick it muffled breath. Bethany's face paled. Preston's hand twitched toward her arm, as if to steady the illusion. Funny thing about technology, I said. It remembers better than people do. She straightened, voice trembling but defiant. That recording is manipulated. He's using his position in state government to fabricate evidence against me. Someone in the crowd muttered, That's her voice, all right. Another whispered, She's been fining us for years. Bethany slammed her folder shut, the sound cracking through the tension. Enough. I will not tolerate these false accusations. In fact, there's another matter, one Mr. Remy hasn't been honest about. She turned to the board, chin high. Our records show an unpaid HOA loan taken by his late father in 2003, $300,000 from the Community Reserve Fund. With interest and penalties, that debt now exceeds $500,000. Gasps again, louder this time. Bethany held up a document with a notary seal glinting under the lights. Signed and certified, which means, according to HOA bylaws, the debt transfers to his heir. Mr. Remy owes this community money. For a heartbeat, even I was still. The accusation was bold, rehearsed, and timed like a blade thrust. I walked forward, took the document from her, and studied it under the fluorescent glare. The signature looked real, my father's looping hand, the notary seal clean. But the date made my stomach turn. Impressive forgery, I said quietly. Almost perfect, except for one detail. I held it up for all to see. My father was deployed in Afghanistan during 2003. I have his service records, photos, and letters to prove it. Kind of hard to sign HOA loans from a war zone. A ripple of disbelief ran through the room. Bethany's confidence flickered. I continued, voice low but carrying. You see, I've dealt with forgery before. I know how paper fibers age, how ink oxidizes, how notary seals leave trace chemicals unique to their issue year. The one on this page? I pointed. It wasn't printed until 2007. Judge Ramirez, who'd been sitting quietly in the back row, rose. I'll take that document, Mr. Remy. Bethany froze. Judge, this is a private HOA matter. Not anymore, Ramirez said. If what I just heard holds true, it's fraud, and fraud is my jurisdiction. The crowd erupted, half in outrage, half in satisfaction. Bethany tried to speak, but her words drowned beneath the noise. Preston whispered something in her ear, and her mask cracked just enough for me to see the fear underneath. I gathered my things slowly, the noise fading to a dull roar behind me. As I reached the door, I glanced back. Bethany met my eyes, her expression hardening into something colder than anger. Nice try, Mr. Remy, she said softly, almost lost in the din. You'll be broke before morning. Outside, the night smelled of dust and rain about to fall. I looked toward the dam glinting faintly under the moon. If she thought money could shake me, she'd soon learn I'd already weathered storms far bigger than hers. By the time I made it back to the ranch, the sky had turned the color of gunmetal. Thunder crawled across the hills like slow artillery. I left the truck by the barn and sat in the cab for a long moment, listening to the radio static fade into the rain. My hands were steady, but my mind was running through possibilities. How far Bethany would go, who was feeding her this garbage, and how soon her next move would come. I didn't have to wait long. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed with 3 new notifications. My personal checking account, frozen. The HOA debt claim had been formally submitted to the county clerk's office overnight. Attached was a court filing signed by Judge Harrison himself, the same name Ernest had warned me about. She'd managed to weaponize the legal system in less than 12 hours. I poured coffee, the bitter kind that tastes like iron and resolve, then dialed Sarah Coleman. She answered before the second ring. "Morning," she said. "You sound like you haven't slept." "Hard to sleep when someone forges a $300,000 debt against your property," I replied. "I saw the filing," she said. "It's sloppy. The notary stamp is wrong, and the signature on the county ledger doesn't match the scanned version in the state archive. I've already drafted a rebuttal. But Jake, this isn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This is organized." "I know," I said, "and I plan to organize back." By midday, the storm had broken wide open. Sheets of rain hammered the porch roof, the kind that drowns sound and thought alike. I spent the afternoon printing copies of every piece of evidence. The false documents, the forged note, the time-stamped violation photos. Each page went into a waterproof binder, because I'd learned that in a fight like this, the first casualty is always the truth, and the second is the paper that proves it. Near dusk, my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number, local prefix. "Mr. Remy," a man's voice said. "This is Robert Whitfield. Could we talk?" Bethany's husband. Every instinct told me to hang up. Instead, I said, "Where?" "Behind the old feed store, 20 minutes. The feed store had been abandoned since 2010, a tin building half collapsed under its own rust. I drove there anyway, parking beneath the overhang. The rain had slowed to a mist. Robert stepped out from the shadows, drenched, his face pale and tired. "She's gone too far," he said. "That loan document, she paid a guy in Bozeman to forge it, said it'd be enough to bleed you dry before you could react." "You've got proof?" I asked. He nodded, fumbling a flash drive from his pocket. "Audio recordings, years worth. Meetings, phone calls, arguments. She made me keep them for leverage, but I kept copies for myself. She thinks she's untouchable. She's not." "Why give them to me?" He hesitated, rain dripping from his chin. "Because I'm done. And because she doesn't just want your ranch. She wants to erase your grandfather's name from this valley. The whole thing's about revenge. And money. Always money." I took the drive. "If what's on this checks out, you'll need protection." He shook his head. "Just use it. End this." He walked off into the fog before I could say another word. Back home, I loaded the files on a secure laptop. Dozens of audio clips. Some were short, Bethany berating board members. Others were long meetings where Preston Hale's voice slithered through discussions about land acquisition and cleaning up problem owners. One clip stopped me cold. Bethany and Harrison plotting how to freeze my accounts before sunrise. That was enough. I emailed Sarah a copy and backed everything up to my department's encrypted server. Within minutes, she replied, "This is gold. But brace yourself. They'll hit back hard." Lightning flashed outside. casting the kitchen in stark white. The rain had eased, but the wind carried that charged silence that comes right before something breaks. I stepped onto the porch, the flash drive still warm in my pocket. Across the road, the lights in Bethany's house burned bright even though it was near midnight. Through the curtains, I saw her pacing, phone in hand. The calm mask from the meeting was gone. Her gestures were sharp, frantic. I went back inside and picked up the landline, the old rotary phone that still hung by the stairs. I dialed Sheriff McKay's personal line. "McKay here." "Sheriff, it's Remy. I have recordings implicating Bethany Whitfield, Judge Harrison, and developer Preston Hale in fraud and financial conspiracy. I'm delivering them to the federal office in Helena first thing tomorrow." There was a pause. "You sure you want to light that fuse?" "Too late," I said. "It's already burning." He sighed. "All right, Jake. I'll keep a patrol near your road tonight, just in case the weather stirs more than clouds." After I hung up, I sat at the table listening to the wind rattle the window frames. My grandfather's photograph hung on the wall, his eyes forever half smiling under the brim of his hat. "Guess it's our turn again," I said quietly. The thunder rolled long and low, like an answer from somewhere deep inside the mountains. The storm had changed direction, but it wasn't leaving. Not yet. By dawn, the clouds had moved on, leaving the air sharp and clean. I brewed a pot of coffee and packed the flash drive, the permit papers, and the ledger copies into my briefcase. Before the sun was over the ridge, I was on the road to Helena, tires hissing over wet asphalt. The radio played a morning farm report, the kind of calm voice that didn't know half the valley was about to explode. At the federal field office, Sarah met me at the steps. Her hair was pinned back, her coat still damp from the drive in. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "Once we file, they'll know exactly where to hit you." I handed her the case. "They already have. I just plan to hit back harder." Inside, we spent 2 hours with a federal auditor who listened more than he spoke, taking notes in slow pen strokes. When we played Bethany's recordings, he stopped writing halfway through, his expression flattening. "I'll flag this to the Public Corruption Unit," he said. "Between the forged loan and the audio, you've got RICO-level violations, but it'll take a few days to open a formal case." "Days I don't have," I said. "She's already got Harrison signing orders." "Then protect what you can," he said simply. "Keep your own paper trail clean." On the drive back, the sky stretched wide and merciless, the color of old denim. I rolled down the window, letting cold wind slap the fatigue out of my head. When I turned up my driveway that afternoon, a white envelope was nailed to the gate post. Cease and desist order stamped in red across the top. Inside was a court injunction, signed by Judge Harrison, freezing all financial activity related to my property. My accounts, my permits, even my business license. The ink was so fresh it still smelled of toner. For a long moment, I just stood there, the paper shaking slightly in my hands. Then I laughed, a dry, hollow sound that startled the magpies from the fence. "Nice try," I muttered. That night I called Marcus Reed, the forensic accountant Sarah recommended. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Remy," he said in a clipped tone, "I've been reviewing the HOA ledgers. You were right. They've been bleeding their reserve funds into a maze of shell companies. Preston Hale's signature shows up everywhere." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that if I print it, the ink might catch fire. We're talking 800,000 in fraudulent disbursements, payments to consultants that don't exist, construction contracts never completed. Harrison and Hale both signed approvals." "Document everything," I said. "If they can freeze my funds, I can melt theirs." "I'll have a report ready by morning," he said. "But Jake, be ready. They'll know you're digging." I hung up, turned off every light in the house, and sat by the window, watching the long shadows crawl across the ranch. Somewhere beyond the dam, a single headlight cut, through the dark. Someone driving slow, too slow for a neighbor. The car paused near the pump house, then rolled away. The phone buzzed a minute later. A blocked number. I answered without speaking. Jake Remy, a familiar voice drawled. You've been busy. Filing reports, contacting auditors, stirring up dust. It was Judge Harrison. His tone oozed confidence, the kind that came from years of unchallenged power. Let me give you some friendly advice. Withdraw your complaint. Drop the theatrics. Otherwise, I'll make sure your land becomes a liability no bank will touch. I let the silence stretch. You've already tried that, I said finally. Now it's my turn. He laughed, a slow, cruel chuckle. You're standing in quicksand, son. The more you fight, the deeper you sink. Funny, I said. I built dams for a living. I know how to control water when it rises. Click. The line went dead. The next morning, Sarah called in a rush. Jake, they've filed 3 new lawsuits: defamation, harassment, and interference. It's a full-blown counterattack. But I filed an emergency motion transferring the case to federal court under water rights jurisdiction. That means Harrison's out of play. Good, I said, exhaling. Time to bring them into daylight. By afternoon, I was in town meeting Marcus at the diner. He slid a thick folder across the booth. Dozens of printouts, bank transfers, and fake invoices. Here's your smoking gun, he said. Every illegal dollar has a trail, and every trail leads back to the same 2 names. Bethany Whitfield, Randall Harrison. I flipped through the pages, each line a nail in their coffin. The waitress refilled our coffee and glanced between us, sensing something serious but knowing better than to ask. When I stepped back outside, the sun was setting over the valley, turning the clouds pink and bruised. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something like relief. But it didn't last. A text came through just as I reached my truck. Nice paper, Jake. Let's see how long it takes before it burns. No number, no name. But I didn't need one. I drove home slow, headlights carving through the dark. The ranch lights glowed warm against the hills, the dam shining faintly like a promise waiting to be kept. Inside, I locked the doors, set the new evidence on the kitchen table, and took a long breath. They'd frozen my accounts, tried to choke me in paperwork and fear, but they'd forgotten what my grandfather always said. You can't freeze the truth. It keeps moving, even under ice. By dawn, frost glazed the porch rail, the air sharp enough to bite. I loaded the binder of evidence into the passenger seat and drove toward Helena, the mountains pink in first light. It was court day, the federal hearing that would decide whether this land was a home or a hunting ground for lawyers. The federal courthouse stood like a block of pale stone against the sky. Inside, the echo of footsteps mixed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah met me by the security checkpoint, clutching a file thick as a Bible. Her eyes were tired but bright. You ready? She asked. Been ready since the day she called the cops on me. The courtroom itself felt colder than the weather outside. Judge Ramirez presided at the bench, expression unreadable, while Bethany sat across the aisle, pristine as a mannequin in white silk. Preston Hale occupied the row behind her, phone in hand, whispering to a nervous-looking attorney. Beside them sat Harrison, his robe replaced by a gray suit that couldn't hide the rot beneath it. Ramirez adjusted his glasses. We are here to determine the validity of financial and property claims against Mr. Remy and the Willow Ridge HOA. Bethany's lawyer rose first, voice slick as oil. Your Honor, my client represents the rightful community interests. Mr. Remy has interfered with HOA governance, disseminated false recordings, and endangered neighborhood safety with his unlicensed dam. Sarah stood, calm as a winter stream. Your Honor, what we have here is not governance, it's graft. I intend to show this court evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and forgery orchestrated by the HOA president, her developer partner, and a sitting judge. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Ramirez raised a hand. Proceed, counselor. Sarah clicked the remote. The monitors behind the bench came to life, displaying Marcus's forensic report, bank transfers, dummy companies, and ledger entries showing HOA funds routed into Preston's shell corporations. Each slide hit like a hammer. Next came the audio. Bethany's voice filled the room. Only the old bushes, leave the new ones, and wear the shoes I left you. They're 2 sizes bigger. Bethany stiffened in her chair. Harrison whispered something to his attorney, but Ramirez caught it. Judge Harrison, any reason your name appears on these authorizations? Harrison tried to smile. Administrative oversight, Your Honor. Routine signatures. Sarah didn't miss a beat. Routine? Then perhaps you can explain the signature on this notary form, dated 2003 but stamped with ink that wasn't manufactured until 2007. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Ramirez leaned forward, studying the document. That's a serious allegation. It's more than allegation, Sarah said, placing a small recorder on the table. We also have corroborating testimony from Mr. Robert Whitfield. The doors opened just then, and Robert stepped in, escorted by federal agents. He looked thinner, older, but steady. He took the stand, voice shaking only once. My wife ordered the forgery, he said. She told me Judge Harrison would cover it. Preston Hale financed the bribe. He paused, glancing at Bethany. I'm sorry, Beth. The room went dead silent. Bethany's face drained of color, her composure cracking like ice under weight. You lying coward, she hissed, rising from her chair. Sit down, Ramirez said sharply. Sarah turned toward the bench. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all claims against Mr. Remy and request immediate injunction against the HOA's financial activities pending investigation. Ramirez nodded slowly. Granted. Furthermore, I am ordering federal custody for Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Harrison. The evidence presented indicates probable cause for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The gavel struck once. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder. Bethany staggered as marshals stepped forward. You think this is over, Jake? She whispered as they cuffed her wrists. Colorado's next. You can't stop what's already built. I met her gaze evenly. Then I'll just keep tearing down the fences, one state at a time. As the officers led her away, Harrison tried to stand, sputtering about immunity. Ramirez cut him off. Not in my courtroom. Outside, the sky had turned the color of pewter. Reporters clustered by the steps, microphones like bayonets. I said nothing, just walked through the noise, the wind biting at my collar. Sarah caught up beside me. It's done, she said softly. At least this chapter. I nodded, watching a page of the court order slip from my folder and flutter down the steps. It landed in a puddle, the ink running but the words still legible. All liens vacated, property restored. When the papers fell, so did everything they'd built on lies. That night back at the ranch, I lit a fire in the stove and sat by the window. The moon broke through the clouds, casting a long silver path over the dam. The land was quiet again, breathing slow. For the first time since it started, the silence didn't feel like waiting. It felt like peace. Morning broke soft and amber over the valley, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. Steam lifted from the grass, and the pond glowed like a mirror holding the sky. The house creaked as it warmed, old timbers stretching like they, too, were waking after a long fight. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and listened. No sirens, no engines, just the wind moving through the cottonwoods. Down by the gate, Dorothy Kim's old pickup rattled to a stop. She climbed out carrying a clay pot wrapped in burlap. Good morning, Jake, she called. Thought you might want to replant what they killed. She set the pot down, rose cuttings, crimson buds still wet with dew. These came from the last healthy branch of your grandmother's roses. Figured they ought to come home. I smiled, throat tightening. Thank you, Dorothy, for everything. She waved it off. We all just needed someone stubborn enough to push back. Now look at this place. Quiet for once. Quiet, yes, but not empty. Across the road, neighbors were out repainting fences, pulling weeds, and talking again. Simple acts that had vanished under Bethany's reign. The air itself felt lighter, as if the land had taken its first full breath in years. By noon, I'd finished planting the roses along the porch rail. Their roots gripped the soil like they remembered it. I wiped my hands on my jeans and glanced toward town. A county truck was pulling up the old HOA signs from the crossroads. The blue metal clanged against the truck bed, a sound that felt like punctuation. Sarah arrived that afternoon, her car dusted from the long drive. Federal agents wrapped up the property seizures, she said. The Whitfields' accounts are frozen. Harrison's facing indictment in 2 states. And Preston Hale's already skipped town. She handed me a thick envelope. Official notice. The court awarded damages to every homeowner affected by their fraud. They're free, Jake, you did it. I took the papers but didn't open them. We all did. Ernest, Dorothy, Linda, you, Marcus. I just happened to be loud enough to get their attention. Sarah smiled. You're still loud, Jake. That's why the Attorney General called me this morning. They want you to consult on a new oversight program, federal level. You'd be helping other communities fight the same kind of corruption. Let me guess, Marge, I said. You already told them I'd think about it. Of course. She tilted her head. But don't think too long. The world needs more people who read deeds before they read headlines. We laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion and relief at once. That evening, I walked the property one last time before sunset. The wind smelled of cut hay and clean water. Down by the dam, the reflection of the house shimmered across the surface. I could still see my grandfather's outline in memory, hands on his hips, surveying the horizon as if daring the world to take one more inch. When I reached the gate, I noticed something new. The lock was gone. The chain hung loose, swaying gently. Someone had oiled the hinges. The metal no longer groaned when I pushed it. The gate swung wide, the road beyond glowing gold in the low light. I leaned against the post, hat in hand. Guess the land finally forgave us, I murmured. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message popped up. Mr. Remy, my name's Patricia Williams, HOA president from Colorado. We've been following your case. We need help cleaning up our board. Interested? I chuckled softly, staring at the open gate. Of course, I said to no one in particular. There's always another fence somewhere. Behind me, the roses stirred in the breeze, petals brushing one another like applause. As the sun dipped below the hills, I walked back toward the house, boots crunching over gravel, the sound steady and sure. The ranch stood strong again, lights glowing through the windows, a beacon against the dark. Justice had taken its time, but it had arrived. Quiet, patient, and complete. And tomorrow, when the wind shifted and the road called, I'd be ready to answer. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's yours, you know justice takes patience and grit. Drop a simple justice in the comments if you'd have done the same. Every voice keeps these stories alive out here. And if you believe in land, law, and standing tall, stick around and subscribe for the next fight worth watching.